This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
This then will become the highest moment. The completion of a great career, a Super Bowl championship for John Elway and the Denver Broncos.
John Elway picked up his first Super Bowl victory on the very tail end of his career. Thought he might run out of years, but he was able to solidify his legacy with a win over the Packers. It was Super Bowl XXXII. It took place on January 25th, 1998. It was the Green Bay Packers and the Denver Broncos. We go back to watch that game and talk about it right here on Distant Replay. I am Ben George. He's Mike Noto. Tonight, Mike, we go back to 1998. Really good game. I think this is one we always talk about because for John Elway, this really took the monkey off his back. He wasn't one of those guys that really, there's a number of guys around his era that had great careers but could never win the big one.
Yeah, you look at that famed 1983 draft, right? I mean, you have Elway, who took him a very long time to win a Super Bowl. Marino never got one, and Jim Kelly never got one. So, yeah, for sure. That was the story, one of the storylines coming into this game. And the other one was the dominance of the Packers, who are right in the middle of the Brett Favre run in Green Bay.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about storylines. We're going to get you set up for why this game's important outside of it being a Super Bowl for obvious reasons. That makes it very important across the country and the world. But we're also going to talk about this game, how it developed, big plays, the performance of both Elway and Favre, and then also maybe the implications of this game, the legacies of these players, and kind of what happened afterward, and kind of wrap it all up. Have a conversation about quarterbacks too. Some interesting thoughts on this matchup. So let me first remind you, distantreplaypodcast.com is where you can find all of our episodes. Plus, you can also go back and watch all the games that we watch as well. The full broadcast, the YouTube link is right there. You can watch the full game as it aired, the same way we watch it, and we watch the entire game start to finish. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube as well. And make sure, please subscribe to us if you would. And we'll have another episode every single week with games, documentary recaps, that sort of thing. So all in the name of going back and reliving some of these great moments in sports. So let's jump in today's game. Again, Super Bowl XXXII. This game took place in San Diego, Qualcomm Stadium. Not around anymore, but Qualcomm, one of those 80s, 90s, big circular, huge, concrete, gigantic stadiums. Huge crowd. And I know right now, Mike, I appreciate it too, because, we don't have any fans at sports right now, and you forget about these big moments. And it's kind of, I don't know if you even noticed it, but I always looking at it now in retrospect, like, man, I wish we could go back to having fans at these games, because that was a great atmosphere, big stadium, and a great crowd for what they anticipated to be a really big Super Bowl.
Oh, for sure. That environment, just that Southern California football environment, just makes you so envious when you're watching it, especially in the month of January, whether it's a bowl game or a NFL playoff game, or in this case, the Super Bowl. You're dying for an 80-degree and sunny day, and it seems like it's eternal in Southern California.
Yeah, it does, for sure. And this matchup, too, it was, again, the Broncos, very good team. The Broncos that year, 12-4, but they came in as a wild card, which I thought kind of surprised me a little bit, because we think back on these Denver teams, they were really good. And Elway, great, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, one of the best quarterbacks that ever played in the league. And to think back to them as being a wild card was surprising. The Packers were 13-3. They won the NFC Central, they were tied for the best record in the NFC. But I was surprised. I'd forgotten that Denver was a wild card going back on this game.
It's one of these seasons where the Chiefs had a great regular season under Marty Schottenheimer and didn't deliver in the playoffs. Kind of a common theme for that franchise under Schottenheimer. And this was a year where they just, they had a better regular season than the Broncos. But when it came down to it, the Broncos performed better in the playoffs. And
you mentioned it a few minutes ago, but one of the big storylines coming into this has been the domination of the NFC. And the AFC had struggled, and not just losing Super Bowls, Mike. I mean, they were getting blown out for much of those late 80s and early 90s. I mean, it was getting ugly at times, and that was a huge story coming into this, because the Packers, as good as they were, and Favre, in his prime right now at this point, they were 11 or 12-point favorites in the Super Bowl, the Packers were.
Yeah, this is, so to put a snapshot on it, this is Favre's third straight MVP season. He shared the MVP this season with Barry Sanders. you have the Packers as a 12-point favorite. And the Packers are one of these rare teams that you see come along every once in a while where their defense is just as notable as their offense. And I think those two combined really led to the Packers being 12-point favorites. Because like you mentioned, this was a potent Broncos offense, well-balanced offense. I think the thinking going into this game is maybe Denver's defense, would they be up to the task to slow down Brett Favre in that offense?
Yeah, that was no question what was on their mind. I mean, you look at some of those players too. I mean, you referenced them, but that defense for the Packers, their starters included Reggie White towards the end of his career, Santana Dotson, you had Leroy Butler, you had Eugene Robinson, who made a number of big plays in this game. Big Gilbert Brown in the middle. I loved Gilbert Brown, man. He was a huge fella, but he had the neck roll too there at nose guard.
Yeah, and this is the era with like him, Sam Adams, Ted Washington, Tony Saragusa, where like these guys are always mentioned throughout the broadcast. Like there's a focus on, the big run stopper in the middle, Gilbert Brown. And I thought that was pretty funny, them making reference to him throughout the game. And I don't know if you saw the graphic they showed about the number of plays he played in the first half of games as compared to the second half. I thought that was pretty funny. A lot more plays in the first half for Gilbert Brown. He tires out later in the game.
And that was the case in this game too. I mean, I think it was the case for many of the Packers defense. By the time this game was all said and done, they were pretty worn out thanks to that offense by the Broncos. But let's not short the Broncos defense either, though. I mean, as much as there was questions about whether or not they could slow down this Packers team that was very good offensively in the passing game, you still had Neil Smith, who came over from Kansas City, who just signed with them late in his career. You had Keith Traylor, another one of these big defensive linemen. You had Bill Romanowski, everybody remembers him. And that secondary was really good. Ray Crockett, Steve Atwater leading the way there. I mean, that was a very, very good defense.
If you watch football in the 80s and 90s, when you think of safeties, one of the guys you think of is Steve Atwater, and just the punishing hits he used to put on guys. And that was on full display in this game. He had a couple. He knocked out his own players. We'll get to a little bit later. But he also laid the wood to some Packers as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about the offense on these two teams starter-wise. You had, on the Broncos side, I mean, Elway, the matchup of the quarterbacks was the headliner. But I think for the Broncos, Terrell Davis really is a difference maker. And we knew this going into the game, and in retrospect, we know. But, he had a tremendous career with the Broncos, but he had all the impact in the world. But beyond him, you had some good weapons outside. You had Shannon Sharp, was kind of coming into his own, one of those dynamic tight ends that could, run and catch, very athletic. And then Ed McCaffrey, who now we see his son in the league. But I had forgotten that Mark Schlereth on this team, and man, he looks different. He's lost a ton of weight like a lot of these offensive linemen do. He was a big old boy back then.
Oh, yeah, he sure was. And this Broncos offensive line was very famed for that zone blocking scheme that you hear so much about now. And remember, all these years, John Elway, he had years where he had good receiving cores, but he never had that feature back to lean on when maybe the passing game wasn't clicking. And he had that now in Terrell Davis. And, I was thinking when I was watching this game, usually teams either have a very good tight end or a very good receiving core, but this team had both. You had a Hall of Fame tight end in Shannon Sharp and two very good receivers in McCaffrey and Rod Smith.
Yeah, and in both teams. I mean, honestly, the Packers too. You look at the Packers side, Favre was throwing to Robert Brooks and Antonio Freeman. Those guys were deadly in their prime. And then you had Mark Shamir, who was more of a lumbering tight end. I mean, he was not the same mold as Shannon Sharp, but he was very, very good and made some big plays in this game.
Yeah, Freeman's coming off of a very good Super Bowl the year before. The Packers beat the Patriots the year before this, and he had a very good performance in this game. He's a very underrated playoff wide receiver because you never hear him mentioned when people talk about the history of the playoffs. But this 2-year run here, he had a very good run in the playoffs, especially.
He did, and he had a big game in this one, and we'll go through it here as we go through. But it was also interesting. These two teams both featured starting fullbacks. Again, we're still in that era, Mike, where you have fullbacks being a part of that core offensive formation. And Dorsey Levens doesn't get a lot of credit probably throughout his career, but he was a big part of this team too. And his story is great. I mean, he's a guy that kind of bounced around, was a special teams guy coming into the league, and then eventually over like 4 or 5 years became one of the top running backs in the league.
Yeah, old Dorse the horse. I don't know if you ever played Madden for Nintendo 64, But during this era, whenever you gave the ball to Dorsey Levens, John Madden would go, "Old Dorse the horse," every time. But anyway, he's one of these stud running backs, the 6'2", 230, Eddie George mold type. Howard Griffith, the fullback for the Broncos, the nickname, the Human Plow. Beautiful. Which is great. I never get sick of these nicknames. And then William Henderson, like you mentioned, another guy, huge guy, neck roll, typecast fullback. Second late 90s football game we're doing here, second one in 2 weeks, and you have to mention the fullbacks.
Got to. All right, let's jump into the game, Mike. And this game was on NBC, which, we don't see a lot of NBC Super Bowls right now, but this kind of takes us back. And it was Dick Enberg, Paul Maguire, Phil Simms, with Jim Gray and John Dockery on the sidelines. And obviously a great crew that was kind of headlining this thing, but Dockery is not a guy that I think about at all when I think about football broadcasts. But I know you probably do, right? 'Cause he's a Jets guy.
Oh, for sure. So he used to do some stuff on the Jets radio broadcast when I was a kid. And I actually went to the Joe Namath, John Dockery football camp at Quinnipiac University.
They still do that, I think, right?
I'm not sure if they still do it. Definitely probably not doing it this year. But yeah, Namath and Dockery used to do a football camp at Quinnipiac University every year. And because they were teammates with the Jets, like you mentioned.
Why Quinnipiac?
I don't know. They don't even have a football team.
They have
a lot of open fields, maybe. I have no idea.
That's great. That's a throwback for sure. But this game on NBC, you had a great broadcasting crew, and I think overall pretty solid. But, man, this was an era of and we'll talk about it throughout, but the graphics, and this is kind of the tail end of technology, like, for TV especially, the broadcast. From this point until, even next year and a couple of years from now, it shoots to the roof in terms of the technology at their fingertips. Because right now, this is still some basic level, like, that when you think of Nintendo or video games, you mentioned N64, like the graphic quality and some of the packages they ran was pretty elementary compared to what we see now.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, in my opinion, this is the era where you go from, hey, the broadcast is still about the game, and then in the years to come, it's more geared towards attracting a casual fan, right? So in this game, you have, Enberg, quintessential play-by-play guy, classic play-by-play guy, and you had the nuts and bolts football guys in Simms and Maguire, right? I think what happened to Simms as his career sort of unfolded, he's more nuts and bolts football, where maybe, some of the other up and coming analysts aren't. And I think, I don't want to say it passed him by, but, it was nice to see Simms. This is the beginning of his broadcast career, and he was a natural. You forget, you don't really forget how good he was, but you forget how good he was right from the beginning.
Yeah, he's like Tony Romo back then, right? Kind of just coming on the scene,
for sure,
and kind of busting out. But as we talk about Super Bowl, you got to talk national anthem, pregame. Jewel was the singer, Mike. I don't know if you remember that from the national anthem. She was pretty hot back in 1997, 98. Her career was at its peak at that point. And then the coin toss. I always talk about the coin toss. It's a good coin toss. It wasn't the pop culture references in this one, but you had Joe Gibbs, Doug Williams, and Eddie Robinson, three football legends.
Oh, for sure. And all ties, obviously Doug Williams with his college and his pro coach at center field, at the 50-yard line. That must have been cool for him.
And then, of course, we got our first look at Ed Hockley, the head referee.
Did you know he was a trial lawyer?
I did not know.
They mentioned that in this game.
Yeah, that's crazy. I had no idea.
Guns Hockley, the trial lawyer. Talk about intimidating.
Even though we were playing in Southern California, he didn't get to show him off. He had the long sleeves on. It must have been a cool evening. But I feel like he's gotten in better shape since 1998.
Yeah, it was a more modest Ed Hockley. He was not flexing, when he made a first down sign. More modest for sure.
Absolutely. So let's dive into the game, Mike. First quarter, Broncos, again, I was surprised they popped this in. The worst rush defense ever in a Super Bowl. I didn't realize that. It was something they hit on early, but that was a big point for the broadcast early on in this game was, this is a team that does not do very well stopping the run, although it wouldn't matter as much because the Packers obviously focus heavily on the passing game, but bit of a surprise there to be that bad coming into it. And I guess relatively speaking, these are always going to be two of the best teams in football, so bad is very relative in that case. But the Packers came out with an opening drive that was beautiful. You could not have executed a better opening drive. It was Pete Favre throwing it around the field, breaking tackles, avoiding pressure, keeping drives alive, 76 yards, caps it off, touchdown to Freeman. This drive was a beauty for Brett Favre.
It's one of those West Coast offense, scripted first drives that it's just, it's executed to perfection. We see that a lot with these good offenses that script, the first 15 plays, and it was a masterful drive.
Broncos answer. They get a TD as well. A lot of Terrell Davis we'll see throughout this game. Favre throws a pick in this first quarter, but those first two drives were beautiful, 7-7, but it's kind of back and forth after that with the quarter ending with the Broncos about to score again, about to go in after that Favre interception. But overall, I mean, kind of what you expected. Two heavyweights throwing punches early on. A great first quarter to kick this game off.
For sure. And one other thing of note from this first quarter, Terrell Davis takes a shot to the head and, quote unquote, he's a little dizzy, but will return.
Yeah, we always kind of cringe at these moments looking back on these games because, man, you watch football pre 2000, especially pre 2000, but even maybe 2004 or 5. But there's so many hits in these games and so much contact that you don't see today. And yeah, you hear that all the time. Guy's a little dizzy. Guy got his bell rung, that kind of thing. And it plays an impact in this game. I mean, Terrell Davis obviously continues to play, but it's referenced throughout that this hit shook him up and he had to miss a little bit of time throughout this game. So something to keep an eye on for the Broncos there in the first quarter. Second quarter, Elway gets on the board with his first touchdown, a little bootleg, easy run. I mean, look, the defense collapsing on Terrell Davis in that run. He kind of rolls it out. And I imagine, Mike, because he rolls out and he's got his fullback right in front of him. I mean, wide open. Fullback there's not anybody within 10 yards of the fullback. But Elway obviously doesn't take a chance. The throw and catch there, he runs it in. But, man, I imagine that fullback being like, just throw me the ball here. Give me this piece of glory in the Super Bowl. No
doubt that the human plow wanted the ball there. But, Elway's not giving that up and taking that risk, especially what he's been through in his career. But, I don't know how many catches the human plow had in the regular season. But what a play to be able to go to, though, when you have a guy like Terrell Davis. When you have a quarterback with some mobility like Elway, he had a lot of mobility earlier in his career, but sure enough to make things happen at this stage in his career. And when you have Terrell Davis and that ability to run that play, it's kind of an unbeatable combo near the goal line.
Yeah, and this was the start of what turned out to be a really exciting quarter. This is the best quarter, I think, of the entire game, the second quarter. A lot of back and forth, some big plays, great execution. But Elway, his touchdown starts it off 14-7 now. Denver takes the lead. Early in Green Bay's next drive, Favre gets hit. You see Atwater already has an impact in this game. As you mentioned, huge safety, one of the greats. He sacks Favre, hits him from behind, fumble. Denver gets the ball. They're not able to move the ball much. Elam bangs home a 51-yard field goal. Thank God, having a great kicker, man, it always pays huge dividends, and Elam's been one of those. At the time, this field goal was the second longest in Super Bowl history at 51 yards.
Yeah, and that's another way football's changed because these guys routinely now are banging, 45, 55, sometimes even 60-yard field goals. And now at this point in the second quarter, just to update you on Terrell Davis, we have the report coming in from the sideline. He has a concussion. We're using the word concussion, but he will return.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
That's unbelievable to hear it now. You cringe like, what did I just hear? But hey, it was common practice back then. And what about the random toss to Randy Cross in the studio for a breakdown on Shannon Sharp?
So I thought I don't remember this at all. And this is not something that's really utilized ever in TV really now at all. I mean, if they toss the studios for an update for something else. But yeah, so what Mike's alluding to is they toss it to Randy Cross in the studio. He's sitting at a desk in front of a video monitor. And this thing, and I was talking about the graphics being so poor. This had to be the most basic animation you could ever see. It's like it's a stadium, right? It's Qualcomm, I think. I mean, again, it's kind of hard to tell because the graphics are so bad, but it's what it would look like probably in like 92 Madden. And they go to this field. It kind of pans down to this field, again, animated, and it's just got X's and O's. And there's nothing else on the field except for like the offensive. It's just the offensive line, right? I don't even think the defense was on the field. It wasn't receivers. It was just like you have the offensive line and like the quarterback and tailback marked as like O's or X's or whatever it was. And they just kind of throw up a couple of quick like, I can't explain it. I'm going to put it up on our Instagram account.
Yeah,
Mike,
definitely do that because from the graphics, like you mentioned, to the fact that it's like just Randy Cross sitting in like a halftime studio alone. Like it was bizarre.
And I don't
if you can isolate that, definitely put it on the website. People will see what we're talking about.
I just can't figure out. I thought there was definitely telestrators at this point. I mean, I know Madden's known for his telestrators, right? So why is there not an option to throw up just a still of the, the game itself and telestrate some of these routes? Because they actually drew the routes that Shannon Sharpe was running, and they're all jumbled up. The lines are like all on top of each other, and they look like somebody hand drew them. It's just so basic. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is 1998. It's not that long ago. But watching this game, I mean, it felt like the 80s watching this graphics package. And I thought a lot of what NBC did otherwise throughout this game, a lot of their animation, a lot of their graphics for players and that sort of thing, looked pretty good. But this was a big miss.
Yeah, it sort of seemed like they were trying to shoehorn Randy Cross into the broadcast for some reason. I'm not sure if he was like an up-and-comer back then, and they were trying to find a way to feature him. But regardless, just a very very strange use of a breakdown of Shannon Sharpe right in the middle of the quarter.
Yeah, and they did this a few times throughout the game. I think they did Brett Favre, and a couple times he came in. And I guess they were trying some new stuff for the Super Bowl, and maybe that looked good at the time. I don't remember, but looking back on it in retrospect, that does not hold up at all. But I'll try to post that on Instagram and our website so you can see what we're talking about, because it's very unique. Also, throughout this quarter, and I can't believe you pointed that out. That was one of the first things I wrote down in my notes too, by the way, Mike. So at the end of this half too, another tremendous drive by Brett Favre, and we saw a couple of these in this game, but 95 yards. They were backed up to their 5, a couple of big plays to keep the drive alive, but they go all the way down the field, 95 yards, meticulously executed, and then Favre finds Shamir in the back of the end zone, a beautifully lofted ball, perfectly weighted over the defender in the back corner of the end zone. With 12 seconds left, this drive ends up taking half of the quarter, over 7.5 minutes, and the Packers drive it home 17-14 as we go to the half.
Yeah, you had the first drive of the game by the Packers, and the last drive of this half just absolutely surgical. 17 plays, 95 yards, like you mentioned. Chimura made a very big catch earlier on in this drive, and then caps it off with a touchdown catch, and we're going into halftime 17-14.
I love a great drive like that. And it's so fun to watch
when
a
you're
17-play drive.
When you're a fan of a team that's making a drive like that, it's awesome because you know they can't be stopped.
No, they can't. And that was a huge, huge drive for them to keep it close and to really take back the momentum heading into halftime. And we don't see the halftime performance on this broadcast we're watching, Mike, but do you remember who it was, or did you look it up?
I didn't look it up. Who was it?
Boyz II Men, Smokey Robinson, The Temptations. That's a pretty nice little halftime. Kind of surprising in Southern California, but solid halftime show.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, classic.
Third quarter. We go to third quarter. This was the sloppiest quarter, Mike. I think after a really good, well-played first half and especially second quarter, they come back and it's, very sloppy. You got Terrell Davis fumbling his first quarter. Packers recover. Favre has a couple of throws that should be picked off, including one right after this fumble that Atwater, it's kind of lofted, and Atwater jumps in front of it, and he's probably looking down the field to see how far he can return this thing. But he drops it. Then you had a couple of penalties in this quarter where first Green Bay was going to kick a field goal on this drive where Denver jumps off sides. No need to. Is a short field goal. Didn't really hurt him that much. They ended up kicking a field goal anyway. Then you had another one a little bit later on the other side. Packers were punting. Denver jumps off sides, and they let them keep possession. Just kind of a sloppy quarter all around, right?
Yeah, for sure. And just to update you on Terrell Davis at this point, the report coming out of halftime was that he received quote unquote treatment for his concussion, according to Jim Gray, whatever that means. Who knows? I don't know what treatment you give it for a concussion,
Smelling
but anyway.
salt.
Yeah, right. Smack the guy in the face or something like that. What treatment do you give a guy for a concussion? Well, anyway, right after Jim Gray says that, you have the fumble by Davis. So you had the two plays that you mentioned, the Denver going offsides and a field goal attempt doesn't matter because Green Bay just gets a field goal anyway. And then you had the offside on the 4th and 4, and Green Bay ended up punting anyway. So you just have teams sort of shooting themselves in the foot, but it not really costing them big time here up to this point as we get a little bit later in the quarter.
Yeah, and as bad as it kind of was there for that most of that quarter, it's about to get good though, right? This is kind of where things start to turn around. Broncos take the ball over deep in their own territory. This is kind of the signature drive, and I think the signature moment for this game. So Elway takes, he has a nice little drive. A lot of McCaffrey, a lot of Terrell Davis, despite his concussion, still a big part of this offense. But I think the moment we all still go back and look at, big third down play, Elway scrambles, running up on 3 defenders, leaps into the air to try to get the first down, where he gets hit and spun around like a helicopter to get the first down. And the Broncos score 2 plays later to make it 24-17. That play is still one that always that's the play that I remember out this game, Mike. Out of all the plays, I think for most people like myself, that's the play you remember.
Yeah, that may be the indelible image from Elway's career in terms of one play when they show a highlight package for him. And there's sometimes in these big games where players don't play that well as a whole throughout the whole game, but it's overshadowed by one great play that they made. And I think this is it for John Elway. Third down run in the red zone, huge moment, sets up the Davis touchdown run. Davis is 7th of the postseason, by the way. Like you mentioned, Ed McCaffrey, huge on this drive. We learned Ed McCaffrey's nickname, the Bruise, Ed the Bruise McCaffrey. But anyway, back to Elway. This is the helicopter run or the helicopter dive or whatever you want to call it. This is the play that you remember from this Super Bowl if you remember one play.
I kind of had in my memory that it was closer to the goal line or might have been for a touchdown. I mean, I didn't remember it being, 12 yard, like the 12-yard line or whatever it was. 15.
I thought it was in the fourth quarter at least.
Yeah, and I thought it was later in the game as well. But
yeah,
it's what we learn when we go back and watch these games. So the Broncos take the 24-17 lead. Then an interesting end of this quarter. Freeman fumbles the kickoff, trying to get more on the return. Gets hit, fumbles it, gets picked up by Denver. They fall on it. Then I like the play call. Take a shot at the end zone. Very next play to try to really drive that nail in the coffin. Take a big lead there. But Elway throws an interception to Eugene Robinson, makes a great play there. And so you had these 2 huge turnovers, what could have been game changers either way. We're kind of right back where we started.
Yeah, for sure. Like you mentioned, we're right back to where we started.
Quarter ends with Favre hitting Antonio Freeman. And again, Freeman responds after this fumble too, by the way. This is what great players do. He doesn't kind of sulk, and it doesn't really affect his play. If anything, it motivates him, and he responds this fourth quarter. But hits a big pass, 27 yards. We go to the end of the third quarter. Green Bay's got the ball right around midfield, driving down 7, and they continued on, Mike. 3 more plays to start of the fourth quarter. 2 to Antonio Freeman, include 13-yard touchdown pass, and they go 4 plays after that interception by Eugene Robinson, and a chance really where the Elway could have broken their back. Brett Favre shows why he's the 3-time MVP at this point, hitting Freeman 4 plays down the field in 80 yards, and it makes it a 24-24 game.
As those other drives that we talked about from the first half were more surgical, this was hey, let's get the ball down the field and get it in the end zone. Another great drive. So you have the 3 touchdown drives thus far for Green Bay are, you see why they were 12-point favorites coming into this game.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they had some shaky play in between a little bit, but those touchdown drives, man, each one of them were dominant against this Broncos team. But
you know what though, Ben? That's what I think of when I think of Favre.
Yeah.
I think of in one play, in one moment you have awesome drives, and then you have a bad interception like he threw, and then you have a fumble here and there. You know what I mean? Like this is the kind of like a roller coaster ride almost. I think when I think of Favre and I think of sort of the style of play he had, this game sort of encapsulates it.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's perfectly said. I think you're dead on in explaining his career and kind of what type of player he was. Boomer bust, risk versus reward for Favre for sure. So the next few minutes of this game, a handful of minutes, was just really waiting for somebody to really take control of this game. I mean, I would imagine if you're a fan of either one of these teams, you're thinking, okay, defense got to stop. Here comes my quarterback. And it was like this a few different times. And Favre, as good as he was on a lot of these drives, had a chance for some big plays in this fourth quarter. So they got the ball back again after this touchdown. They stopped the Broncos, and he overthrows Freeman. Then another play, he's got a guy cutting across, I think Brooks cutting across midfield. And I think if you'd have let him a little bit more, it would have been another big play. Got to give credit to, I think it was Eugene Robinson maybe that broke it up. But 2 big plays there that seemed like, with them being at midfield too, either one of those plays is going to end up in points if they complete them. A couple of misses by Favre there. But look, again, the Broncos didn't do a whole lot with it either. They went back and forth for about 7 or 8 minutes here with I was just waiting, Mike. Like, who's going to take control of this game?
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point, and this is something I've circled in my notes. Denver punts back to Green Bay with 5:25 left. Green Bay has somewhat of a drive going, right? Favre misses a wide open Antonio Freeman on third down. It's a tough throw because it's across his body, but it's a throw that, again, if you go back and watch, you've seen Favre make this throw a million times in his career. And I think that this is one of these, the play during these games, there's at least one every game we do where it'll never be talked about. But had that play gone differently, the game could have ended differently. I think that this play is that for Green Bay, because now they end up punting to Denver with 3:27 left, and Denver with great field position at the 49-yard line.
As good as Favre had been, I mean, this is a quarter where, you have two great quarterbacks, Mike. This is a quarter where both these guys really didn't make many big plays. It was kind of their teammates that picked them up. I mean, obviously Favre, beginning of this quarter, when that big drive with Freeman there to start things off was big. But after that, he missed a ton of throws, couldn't move the ball despite good field position because both punters were not doing a very good job. And Paul Maguire even called him out and talked about punters. You get paid to do one thing, like don't screw it up, right? And they were multiple times. And ultimately it ends up with the Broncos having the ball with about 3:30 left. Again, back in midfield after the field position had flipped again. The big play in this drive was a pass to the fullback, Mike. After all that, your boy gets a big pass out of the backfield with a huge block by McCaffrey, by the way. Kind of one of those blindside receiver blocks, the guy's chasing down the ball carrier. And this is the big play of the drive that springs him down there and puts him in position to score. Yeah, the human plow, right? Set up on a block by the Bruise is the biggest play of this Super Bowl, maybe, but certainly of this drive. And it's Griffith only caught 11 passes all year, but he's where he needs to be in crunch time. Green Bay would let them score here, no doubt with that, right? They let them score. I don't know, Mike. So if you remember back to when this game was played, that was the discussion the next day. That was like the sports talk radio. Let's talk about something for 5 hours that may or may not be important. One of those topics. That was it. And I remember, number one, did they just let them score? And number two, was it the right move? Well, I mean, I go back and forth. Like maybe they did, but I also feel like the defense was pretty worn out at that point because they had just been hammering them with the run game. And here we are again, late in the game. But maybe they did, and it made sense because they got the ball back with 1:45 left. I mean, the Packers had all the time in the world with 2 timeouts, and Brett Favre to be in that position. I still think with 2 timeouts, though, you try to hold them to a field goal. I mean, I just feel like that's the play. That's the one. You're exactly right. You got to remember, we're still talking about a 24-24 tie here, right? And although with the way Davis was going, you can make the argument. This is 158 yards now for him after he runs this ball in for the touchdown. His 8th touchdown of the postseason, 3rd of the game. I err on the side of, hey, why not try to stop them so they can kick the field goal or at least let it play out a little bit longer? You know what I mean? Yeah, there was enough time with Favre in that offense, but yeah, I mean, you can discuss that. But that 3rd TD, by the way, was a new Super Bowl record. 3 rushing touchdowns in a single game by Terrell Davis, and it made it 31-24 again. 1:45 left, and I was hoping for some Favre fireworks here late in the game, Mike, but he didn't do anything. And again, kind of the fourth quarter. I mean, he didn't hit a lot of plays or big plays after they scored that touchdown when they needed him, and he kind of fell short. And I was a little disappointed in the way that game finished out because, I mean, the Broncos did go and win it, but I didn't feel like it was with these 2 great teams and 2 great quarterbacks that anyone went out and won it. I just feel like it just kind of petered out at the end. Yeah, you know why I felt that way was because, first of all, like you said, not very exciting plays on the first couple plays of the drive for Favre, 2 dump-off passes to Levens. They gained some yards, but nothing spectacular. You had the big Freeman drop on 2nd down. Huge drop. I don't think he just dropped the ball. And I think the reason why this game sort of just petered out, like you said, was on 3rd down before the deciding 4th down play. There was a really serious collision between Steve Atwater, his teammate Hilliard, and Antonio Freeman, and all 3 of them left the game. Yeah, it was one of those where the ball's up in the air, middle of the field, and you have one defensive back coming from one side, safety's closing in from the other, and then the receiver going up. I think Freeman got under it a little bit, but it was basically Atwater helmet to helmet on his own teammate. And he gets knocked out too, by the way. Brutal. I mean, that was a brutal hit, and I think after that, I was like, whoa. That's one of those hits. And I had forgotten it was even 4th down. Until they showed it, I had forgotten, like, oh, wow, it's 4th down. The season's on the line right now. Yeah, and those guys were off the field. And it was a big opportunity for them. Packers didn't do anything with it. But, yeah, I mean, that was one of those where, I mean, Atwater gets knocked out. And if you see a guy do that, you know automatically, okay, he's done. He's going back to the locker room for the rest of the game. And they didn't have to play him anymore because there was only one more play and the game ended. But, he sat up and walked off the field on his own accord, and he probably would have gone back in the game, Mike, next possession if it came to that.
Oh, for sure. All three of these guys would have been back in the game.
Unbelievable.
Look, the MVP of this Super Bowl, Terrell Davis, was legit playing with a concussion that was announced by the sideline reporters.
Yep. And nobody thought anything of it.
No one. I forgot about it.
Yeah.
I've never heard that talked about since.
Yeah, well, we're talking about it now. So let's close it out, Mike. 31-24. Elway gets his first Super Bowl. Packers fall short of winning back-to-back Super Bowls. Brett Favre didn't really deliver, although he had a pretty good game. I mean, you look at the final stats. Favre threw it 42 times, which is crazy. 25 for 42, 256 yards, 3 touchdowns, and interception. You had Dorsey Levin's pretty good game, 19 rushes, 90 yards. And then Freeman had the big game, receiving nine catches, 126, and 2 touchdowns. For the Broncos, Elway, just 12 of 22 for 123 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Thankfully, Terrell Davis was behind him, 30 carries, 157, and 3 touchdowns. I didn't remember how bad of a game Elway had. And I think it's fair saying bad. I mean, he didn't. He made a couple of nice runs, right, when he had to. But otherwise, there was not a whole lot that you think back and remember about Elway's performance.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it was overshadowed by that one scramble, right? It was overshadowed by and I think it was also overshadowed by the fact that the next year in the Super Bowl against Atlanta, he had a much better game.
Yeah, that's true. I think that helps a lot.
But 12 for 22, 123 yards. I mean, we have these games where very good quarterbacks, sometimes legendary quarterbacks like Elway, they get their Super Bowl win, but maybe they don't have the greatest game and their teammates pick them up. And that's what happened in this game. And, from a Packers standpoint, if you tell me Favre was going to throw for 255 and 3 touchdowns and 1 interception, and we're going to have a 100-yard rusher, I'd tell you we'd probably win the game. So even from that standpoint, Green Bay had to be a little bit surprised that they couldn't stop what was essentially a one-dimensional offense in Denver.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising. And I thought the Packers were a better team. I mean, honestly, I think all around a better team, although the Broncos were just solid. I mean, they were solid in every spot and had a really good quarterback leading them. But I thought the Packers were a little bit better team, and I think they probably regret not winning the Super Bowl. Probably a disappointment for them. But either way, the Broncos pull it out, and they ended the streak of 13 straight years where the NFC had won the Super Bowl. A couple outdated notes, Mike. We'll have some final thoughts, too, on this game in a second, but some outdated. Again, I love it talking about they don't really know how to promote websites at this point. They had SuperBowl.com. We've talked about it before, but SuperBowl.com was a website they were using, and Gil Brandt was on there discussing the game, they said, online. And they only talked about it one time, only promoted it one time. Like, it's one of those things where they had to do it. They didn't really know what they were doing with it. Kind of like Randy Cross in the studio. Like, we have this. Let's do something with it. We don't know what, but here it is. That was funny. But again, no first down line. And I thought the first down line was around late 90s, but we did not have it here. And then again, no running clock and score in the 97 season, 98 Super Bowl. Pretty nuts.
Yeah, we talk about this. I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you knew this was coming up because we mention it every time, but you still don't get used to it. Now that you're saying it, I'm realizing it wasn't there. When did that come into effect? In the early 2000s?
Yeah, it must have been. I mean, I'm trying to think back to the first game that I remember us doing and seeing it on. I guess it wasn't on the last game we did with the Music City Miracle, right? I guess I don't remember seeing it there either. So, yeah, probably early 2000s, probably around the time of HD, but I could have sworn it was pre-HD.
I'm pretty sure it was in effect during like the Rams Patriots Super Bowl.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. But, yeah, I noticed that in this one because it's hard to follow these games without the score and clock and then also add in no first down line. And what seems like a pretty modern game when you think back to the 98 Super Bowl, at least for us, because, we're that was kind of right in our prime, right in our wheelhouse of watching the NFL and a lot of the guys we grew up watching when we were younger. But overall, those are the outdated items that I had. Mike, what did you have? Anything?
The only outdated, again, the outdated stuff that I had revolved around sort of just a lot of the stuff from without going into the stuff from last week's game, because a lot of it's similar in terms of the neck rolls, the bigger pads, the sort of outdated way the game was played. One thing that I noticed was just as a whole, the way the game's changed. I mean, they showed a graphic in this game that the 5 top passers of all time up until this game had never won a Super Bowl. Marino, Elway, Moon, Tarkenton, and Fouts. And just how the game would change in the next, generation, if you will, where you have top passers that get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl all the time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I was shocked when I saw that graphic, and I put it up on our Instagram accounts for people to see as well. I was shocked by that graphic when they put it up. I'm right there with you.
You could have made the argument back then, and this is just 1997. This is not that long ago, where like if your quarterback was too good and put up too many yards, it may not be a good thing for your team in terms of winning the Super Bowl. But you look now, Rodgers, Breeze, Manning, Brady, all these guys, you think like, hey, I have to, Mahomes, like you think of like, I have to have one of these guys to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, you would think so. But yeah, that was not the case back then. But Elway is able to erase that by the end of this game and kind of changes from that point moving forward. So another note I quickly mentioned from this game too, you had some pretty good coaches with Holmgren who actually exited after this loss and went to Seattle. And then you had Shanahan on the other side. But then you had Andy Reid on the sidelines too, a young Andy Reid up there. It was kind of interesting to see him before he took over and became a head coach. And now we see he's the latest Super Bowl winner.
So Andy Reid went to Philly, 99?
Yeah, I think it was 99.
His first year was McNabb's first year, I'm pretty sure. I mean, for my money, he's a better coach. He ended up being a better head coach than Shanahan or Holmgren.
Yeah, he's very good. So that's interesting. Now, I think one last thing I want to wrap up with, Mike, is your thought looking back on this game, and this was a heck of a Super Bowl. I think 2 powerhouse teams. A lot of times we get matchups that are, they're fine. They're Super Bowl, so you're going to always appreciate it and enjoy it. But it's one of those rare matchups where you had 2 great teams with 2 really good quarterbacks. But as you're going back and watching this game, I mean, is this one of the all-time great matchups of quarterbacks?
Yeah, if you talk about their place in the history of the game, all our listeners can let me know if you guys can think of another better matchup, but I can't remember a better matchup between 2 quarterbacks as far as their place in the history of the game in the Super Bowl. The only one I can think of that was close in recent history was the Manning and Breeze. And maybe if you go back, Staubach and Terry Bradshaw maybe, but are those 2 considered to be as good all-time quarterbacks as Elway and Favre? I think that's debatable. So I can't think of a better matchup. Can you?
No, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it because I hadn't really thought about it. But I think you're probably spot on. I mean, if not number 1, maybe it's got to be top 2. I mean, and then you're talking about, I mean, Elway's not in his prime, but he's still very good as we see because they win again the next year. But Favre's won 3 straight MVPs. I mean, these are 2 guys about at the top of their game, not quite for Elway again, but still. And you have two of the best, almost in their prime with both of them, and a game that turns out to be a really good game as well. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe you can make that argument.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where these guys rank for you all time, but for these guys, I mean, just off the top of my head, when I think of good quarterbacks overall, these guys are easily in the top 10. And as far as the modern era of football, let's say 1980s to now, I think of these 2 definitely in the top 5.
Yeah, I would agree with you from that perspective as well. Well, good conversation, Mike. Good game. Going back to watch this one, I thought the game was really good. I was kind of surprised that I didn't remember as much of it as I maybe thought would have, because this game was obviously on our radar, one that we locked into when it happened with these 2 guys playing. But I was surprised by how much was kind of new to me going back and watching this one.
Yeah, for sure. I have this was like during the height of when I used to watch football religiously. I'm 15, 16 years old here. And there was parts of this game I had no recollection of, players I had no recollection of. And that's why it's awesome going back and watching these games, because once you start seeing these guys, you start remembering. But, a 31-24 Super Bowl with these 2 top flight quarterbacks, I think it's a little bit of an under the radar Super Bowl that was much better than maybe, because I don't think if you ask someone, hey, what are the top 10 Super Bowls of all time? I don't know if this one's going to be mentioned.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I don't think it comes to your mind immediately. I think maybe if you go back and look at each of them, maybe it would come up on your list, but maybe off the top of your head, you might not say that.
Because we've had so many good ones the last 15 years or so, or 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been, since this game, it's been a much different story than it was the previous 13 or 14 before this. So very interesting time in the NFL and a great game. Good to see Elway get his first one. And Favre, boomer bust, man. Some great drives, but fell flat in some key moments. But overall, a great game. The Super Bowl 32 is a wrap for Distant Replay. Again, find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Let us know if there's a game you want us to go back and watch and discuss. We'd love to hear from you. We've already taken a couple of listener requests. Turned out to be great games. We'd love to hear what game you think we should go back and watch. Mike, enjoyed it as always. Look forward to talking to you on the next episode.
Sounds good, Ben. Until then.